Welcome to EDLD 5345 Week 1. Normally we would have a live conference. This week is a little different due to the holiday and kind of how the schedule came out, so watch for announcements of when office hours will be, but this will be a recorded lecture for Week 1. So we do have some norms. I'm not going to belabor these because we'll go over those next week, and you have an introduction about emails and that kind of thing. So when you think about human resources, that's what this class is about. There's a lot of things you have to consider. You have to consider knowledge of policy, hiring, staffing numbers, making sure that you have a qualified staff, and we'll kind of talk about all of that as we develop through the weeks of this course. You have to be very strategic in your human talent management. So there's a lot of things that are dictated by the district, like salary and benefits, but there's other things that you can do on your campus to make sure you have a culture and climate where your staff can grow, be happy, and thrive like your students. So when you think about human resources, kind of in that context of the principalship, human resources are a diverse set of individuals on your campus that offer that value, that they offer that value in the day-to-day operation and its effectiveness, and that there's a positive academic outcome. So you are the leader, you're there to inspire, you are there to create the culture and climate of that campus, and that is all part of human resources. Todd Whitaker has this quote about it's never about programs, it's always about people. So people don't leave people, they leave jobs. So it's up to you to create that climate where they want to stay once you've hired them, where you can grow them, development, and keep them. When you think about being strategic in human talent management, you want to plan ahead. You want to be proactive. You got to think things through and what staffing you need, how to use your staff most efficiently. You've got to be very intentional. There are coordinated efforts in that with many special programs, and you've got to be collaborative to make sure you have the best staff there, that they have the work experience they need, that you get to retain them. So the role of policy in human resources management is it helps to kind of guide decisions. It helps individuals operate within the workplace. It makes things consistent. So most school districts use TASB for their policy online. They have the lawyers, they have the verbiage, they take the law, and then they make it into the wording they need to have policies for individual districts. There's a few things that districts can choose, but very few. So in that, know that the school board approves that policy. Most of it is online. We have a video on how to find that policy online, or if you can't find it, contact your section professor. So we're going to look at these parts of policy online as part of this course in Week 1, and we're going to kind of go over those. So when you think about DAA legal, that's all about that equal employment opportunities, where you're not going to discriminate on anybody based on those characteristics listed on this slide. That's a pretty standard one you hear about, that you know about, but you got to make sure that you follow it, especially when you think about that one with age and even older people in higher than. So when you look at DC legal, that is about employment and duties. It talks about that the superintendent, the board evaluates and employs the superintendent. The superintendent makes recommendations about other personnel, but the principal approves each teacher and staff member on their campus. This one also goes into posting vacancies, which will go into Week 2, and it also goes into the grievance policy. So you'll want to look at your district's policy on that. DK Legal looks at credentials, permits, principal approval, transfers, and parent notifications. So you want to make sure that your staff is credentialed out. If not, you've got parent notifications that have to happen, that principal approves any of those things and keeping that person on the campus, and approves any transfers. FFG is about student welfare and child abuse. It is your duty to report that, and there are some pretty stiff penalties if you do not. Like possibly being arrested, fines, maybe some jail time. So you got to make sure you do that, and you got to make sure your staff is trained and know that they are responsible for doing that as well. DH legal is all about educator ethics, electronic communication policy. We all have a code of conduct to follow, and if we don't, that's usually when we get into the media and we show up on the newspaper or on TV, and you don't want to do that. You don't want any of your staff members to do that. So you want to be cognizant of those things. You want to know what the ethics are that they must follow. You want to review that with your staff. You also want to review that electronic communication policy. That doesn't come up too much in elementary. However, it does in secondary, especially with those sponsors of clubs and organizations, texting to tell them that practice is here or there. You just want to make sure that they're following policy and that nothing goes awry there. DIA legal is about unlawful employment discrimination, retaliation, and that you have a harassment-free workplace. So be sure and look at that online in your district so you kind of know what your district has in place there and that you follow it. Notice that one's a legal one and not a local one. So when you think about policy online, some other things you may want to look at are personnel links within policy online. You may want to look at credentialing, kind of how criminal history plays into that, incentives and stipends, compensation, the types of contracts offered by your district, leaves and absences always come up, so you will want to be aware of that policy as well. You will definitely want to know about non-renewals and what you have to do in a non-renewal situation and what rights your staff has, so that doesn't surprise you. The appraisal calendar and schedule, and any kind of professional development that has to happen. You want to know about reduction in force, just in case numbers go down in students, and you have to release an employee based on reduction in force. You want to know about that, and then any employee rights and privileges. So when you think about categories within the Code of Ethics, you have practices and performance, conduct towards colleagues, and conduct towards students, kind of broke up into 3 parts. So when you think about practice and performance, that's about making false statements, inappropriately using district resources, accepting gifts and favor, falsifying records. So that could be grades, that could be testing material, changing answers, whether they had a criminal history of employment or certification history that's an issue, any use of illegal drugs or abuse of that, and then consumption of alcohol on school property or at a school event. When you think about conduct towards other colleagues, you cannot reveal another colleague's health or personal information. You can't make a false statement about an employee of another colleague or the school system. Failure to adhere to policy and law, interfering with a colleague's right to exercise political, professional, or citizenship rights and responsibilities, discrimination, using coercive means or promising special treatment in order to influence another colleague, or any kind of retaliation is not acceptable. When you think about educator conduct towards students, you can't reveal confidential information about a student. You can't intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly have reckless treatment of a student in any matter, or misrepresent facts about a student in any matter. Exclude a student based on, you fill in the dots there. You can look in policy online for that. Intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly engaging in physical treatment of a student. Soliciting or engaging in sexual conduct or romantic relationship with students. That's the one that shows up in the media a lot. That's not something you want to have to deal with, promise me. So just pay attention to that. Make sure your staff knows. And if you have any suspicions, get on top of it ahead of time and have those conversations. And or furnishing drugs or alcohol to anyone under the age of 21. So when you think about the Code of Ethics, that's a standard of personal and professional conduct. Any violations can affect your certification, and all of those things go to SBEC, which is the State Board of Educator Certification. When you think about teacher contracts in general, this comes from Chapter 21 of the Texas Education Code, and it says a teacher is defined as a principal, a supervisor, a classroom teacher, a counselor, or full-time professional employee who is required to hold a certificate issued by the State Board of Education. So principals are considered teachers when it comes to contracts. So know that. That's kind of interesting for you. There are 3 types of contracts. There's probationary, there's continuing, and there is term. So let's break those down a little further. So a probationary contract is for 1 year. It may be renewed for 2 additional 1-year periods. The school board may authorize a 4th probational year contract. If you're new to the district, you may be put on this contract for 1 year to make sure you're a good fit for the district. If you're returning to the district after a 2-year gap, you may also be put on this type of contract. So probationary contracts, what are they entitled to? Well, they're entitled to all rights and privileges of a teacher, that minimum salary on the salary scale, a duty-free lunch, planning and prep time, the right to resign, and in subchapter F, a hearing before dismissal. So termination at the end of the contract period, let's talk about that for a little bit. If you're under a probationary contract, and the board has the judgment that it's in the best interest of the district for you to be terminated, you can do that under a probationary contract. Usually and generally you want to have some kind of documentation as to what that is, so they can't say it's based off discrimination or other things. So you want to have that in place, but it is a little easier to terminate an employee when they have a probationary contract. So after making the determination, the board must give the employee notice that they've been terminated, not later than the 10th day before the last instructional day under the contract. If the timeline is not properly followed, then there are some other guidelines that have to happen. So failure to let that probationary contract know within those 10 days of that instruction, before instruction ends, they are required and obligated to employ that probationary employee for the next year. So you want to pay attention to timelines. There's no extensions. There's no grace in that. You've got that 10 days before that instructional contract ends to get that to that employee. So usually they try to do those kind of things in March or April, so it does not come up with the end of the school year and have that conflict. But if you don't reach them within that time and notify them, then you've got them for the next year. So just know that. And so I'll let you look at the rest of those. But it is a little easier under that probationary contract to release that employee. So if you got one that you're questioning and it's their 2nd year, then you just go ahead and put them on that probationary contract till you can't. And you're really sure that that employee is a good fit on your campus and for the district. The other type of contracts was continuing contract. This is for an indefinite duration. You do not see this very often. There may be only a few in the state of Texas because it is an indefinite duration. They have the right to resign, to retire, to discharge for good cause. They have the right to a fair and impartial hearing under subchapter F. And like I said, this is a very small percentage because of that indefinite duration. Most of them are under a 1 or 2 year contract, but with probationary, it is that 1 year contract. A term contract is for a certain time period, like 1 to 2 years. Sometimes you'll see a 3-year contract. Majority of districts in Texas use this after you get off that probationary period. It requires a written notice for non-renewal within 10 calendar days from the last day of instruction. Delivery of notice is required. You can't just call them on the phone. You have to deliver a notice in person with paper. And again, at last day of instruction, that last day students are in school and receiving instruction. It's not like if you have contract days that an employee stays at the end to kind of do in-service or whatever, those do not count in that. It's the last day that the students are in school and receiving that instruction is what's considered the last day of instruction. So principals report to the superintendent. So they notify the superintendent no later than the 7th business day after a date of if they're going to terminate an employee or if an employee resigns. Usually you've had those conversations with personnel if you're in a larger district, or the superintendent if you're in the smaller district, if you've got a concern about an employee and are looking at maybe terminating them, or even that